So imagine you're holding a really fragile, shaking camera in a pitch-black corridor,
Oh, man.
right? And you know that if you make a single sound, the entire world just ends.
No pressure at all.
Yeah, exactly. No
Yeah.
pressure. But here's the catch. You aren't a soldier. You aren't, a wizard. You don't have centuries of tactical combat experience or some glowing magical sword to save you. You are, for all intents and purposes, just a gardener.
A very terrified gardener.
A completely, absolutely terrified gardener. You are out of your depth, completely outmatched,
Yeah.
and yet you have to just keep walking forward into the dark.
It's the ultimate nightmare scenario, really.
It truly is. And today, we're doing a deep dive into why that exact scenario, like literally shrinking the scope of a massive world-ending conflict down to one terrified individual, is arguably the most powerful way a storyteller can build just unbearable narrative tension.
It's such a brilliant technique.
It is, and we are pulling our insights today from a really fantastic, highly analytical review by the Princess Toy Nerd channel. They did this incredible breakdown focusing on a masterclass in psychological storytelling, specifically looking at Book 6, Chapter 1 of The Return of the King. The chapter is titled The Tower of Cirith Ungol.
Right, which is just such a pivotal, jarring moment in the entire epic. I mean, the transition into that specific chapter represents one of the most drastic structural pivots in, I'd say, all of modern literature.
Because of where we just came from, right?
Exactly. We are jumping straight from the end of Book 5, where the narrative has been operating on this staggering macro level. I mean, we've just witnessed the absolute apex of high fantasy warfare on the Pelennor Fields.
Yeah, the scale is just absurd.
It is. You have sweeping battlefields, thousands of cavalry riders crashing into these lines of giant monsters, kings delivering these mythic, earth-shattering speeches.
Right, and wizards locked in, like physical and ideological combat with ancient evil.
Yes. The fate of entire nations is being decided in broad daylight, and it's told through a lens that feels almost historical or mythological. It's immense. The scale is almost hard to comprehend.
And then Tolkien structurally just rips the rug right out from under the reader.
Totally.
He completely abandons those sweeping, multi-million-dollar CGI battle sequences.
Which is such a bold move.
Right, because in a cinematic sense, it is the equivalent of abandoning a sweeping crane shot over a battlefield and then suddenly, bam, sticking a shaky handheld camera right over the shoulder of a guy who is literally hyperventilating in a closet.
That is the perfect analogy. He trades the kings and the demigods for two isolated characters, Frodo and Sam. And what is structurally fascinating about that pivot is how the author forces you, the reader, to actually feel that claustrophobia.
It's not just a location change.
No, it's a fundamental shift in the sensory language of the text. Because in Book 5, the descriptions are vast, right? You hear the horns of Rohan echoing across plains. You see the clash of spears from a distance. The prose itself is expansive.
Yeah, it breathes.
Exactly, it breathes. But when we hit the Tower of Cirith Ungol, the prose becomes hyper-focused. It's all about immediate, suffocating sensory inputs.
Like the rough texture of the stone against Sam's hands.
Yes, or the foul smell of the orcs, the heavy, oppressive silence. The narrative lens contracts so severely that it limits our perspective entirely to Sam's immediate, terrifying reality.
But, logically, you would assume that zooming in and looking at a smaller conflict would actually lower the stakes.
You'd think so, yeah.
Like if I'm watching a war movie, the scene where 2 million troops are clashing inherently feels like it has bigger consequences than a scene where, one guy is trying to sneak through a back door.
Right, macro versus micro.
Yeah, shrinking the scope should theoretically make the story feel smaller. Yet, as that Princess Toy Nerd review points out, and I mean, as anyone who has actually read the chapter knows,
Yeah.
shrinking the scope actually spikes the tension to an almost unbearable degree.
It really does. It's agonizing.
So why is that? Why does putting the camera on one solitary, terrified hobbit feel infinitely more stressful than watching an entire city get besieged?
Well, it comes down to the concept of grounding the stakes through vulnerability.
Okay, unpacking that.
Think about the characters operating in those grand battles. You have Aragorn, who possesses this superhuman lineage and combat prowess. You have Gandalf, who is essentially, an angelic being wrapped in flesh, holding profound magical capabilities.
Right, they're heavy hitters.
Exactly. When they are on the battlefield, even when they are losing, you as the reader subconsciously recognize that they are built for that stage. They have what we might casually call archetypal plot armor.
Sure, yeah. They have the tools to influence macro-level events.
But by placing the actual linchpin of the entire war, which is the destruction of the ring, in the hands of two hobbits who are physically weak and entirely alone, the narrative just violently strips away all of those safety nets.
It exposes the raw nerve of the story.
Beautifully put.
Because, if Aragorn loses a battle, he can tactically retreat. The war continues. But if Sam trips in the dark and gets caught by an orc patrol, the universe effectively ends.
Precisely. That contrast highlights the extreme fragility of the mission. The macro relies entirely on the micro. All those grand battles we just witnessed, they are functionally meaningless if these two tiny individuals fail in this dark corridor.
Which is such a crazy realization.
It is. The sudden realization for the reader is that all the visible power in the world, the armies, the kings, the shining armor, it's essentially just a massive, desperate diversion tactic. The true conflict hinges on a microscopic point of failure.
Which brings us to the person carrying the entirety of that failure point on his shoulders at the start of this chapter. Good old Samwise Gamgee.
Samwise the Brave.
And the source material we're looking at spends a lot of time dissecting Sam's psychological starting position in the Tower of Cirith Ungol, and man, it is exceptionally grim.
Oh, it's devastating.
He is completely alone. He has just survived a horrifying encounter with that ancient spider, Shelob. And the most devastating part is that he firmly believes his best friend, Frodo, the person he swore a sacred oath to protect, is either dead or captured, and currently being tortured in the tower right above him.
He is operating in an absolute vacuum of hope.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the magical allure of the ring driving him forward, and he certainly doesn't have some grand prophecy dictating his destiny.
And according to the review, his defining trait in this moment, the tool he uses to navigate this truly impossible scenario, is stubborn devotion.
Right.
But wait, I want to push back on that for a second. Because stubbornness is usually, a terrible trait.
In the real world, yes.
Yeah, like if a CEO refuses to pivot a failing strategy and drives their company straight into bankruptcy, we call that toxic stubbornness. Or if a person is lost in the woods and stubbornly refuses to admit they went the wrong way, that stubbornness gets them killed.
It's usually a refusal to adapt.
Exactly. So how does Tolkien take a trait that is fundamentally about being rigid and refusing new information and turn it into this world-saving virtue?
To understand that inversion, we really have to analyze the specific environment Sam is operating in. Because in a healthy, functioning environment like your example of a modern corporation or, just a peaceful society, stubbornness is indeed a flaw because it is a refusal to adapt to reality.
Right.
But Mordor is not a healthy environment.
Not at all.
Mordor is a biosphere meticulously engineered by a Dark Lord to crush hope, breed despair, and force psychological submission. The very air, the landscape, the architecture of the Tower of Cirith Ungol itself, it is all designed to communicate one single overwhelming message. You have already lost. Give up.
Oh, wow. So the reality of the environment is actively hostile to his survival.
Complete.
But if he adapts to the environment, he surrenders.
Exactly. If Sam were an adaptable, perfectly logical person in this moment, he would analyze the data. He is alone, he is facing an entire garrison of orcs, his master is likely dead, and he has zero martial prowess.
The odds are zero.
The logical adaptation is to lay down and die, or to turn and run back the way he came. Therefore, stubbornness, this irrational, immovable refusal to accept the reality that the environment is trying to force upon him, becomes the ultimate survival mechanism.
That's fascinating.
The text is basically arguing that heroism isn't always a flashy, dynamic action. Sometimes heroism is simply the static, grinding friction of a single person refusing to be moved.
It's the physics of putting one foot in front of the other when your entire nervous system is screaming at you to freeze or flee.
Yes.
Because, flashy heroism, drawing his little sword and yelling a battle cry at the gates would get him slaughtered instantly.
Well, in a heartbeat. It would draw attention, and he would be crushed by sheer numbers. But this quiet, persistent, stubborn devotion allows him to fly completely under the radar.
And it forces him into this reluctant leadership role, doesn't it?
It does. And it's crucial to note, he isn't seeking glory. He explicitly doesn't want to be the hero or the ring bearer. He takes on the burden purely out of mechanical necessity because his devotion to Frodo just entirely overrides his terror.
Right.
By acting out of sheer refusal to abandon his friend, he redefines what it means to be a hero. He proves that the capacity to endure is far more dangerous to evil than the capacity to inflict violence.
Man, that concept of endurance directly contrasts with the reality of what Sam actually encounters when he breaches the Tower of Cirith Ungol.
It's quite the shock.
Yeah, the review highlights this really fascinating observation about the internal mechanics of the Orc garrison station there. Because Sam expects to face an impenetrable, unified wall of evil.
A well-oiled machine.
Right. But the true danger to the Orcs and Sam's ultimate opportunity stems from their own internal structural rot.
Exactly.
The Orcs inside this tower are completely consumed by infighting. They're driven by greed, paralyzing fear, and mutual mistrust. I mean, before Sam even engages them, they're literally slaughtering each other over Frodo's belongings, specifically his mithril coat.
It completely shatters the illusion of the monolithic enemy.
Yeah.
When we picture the forces of darkness in fantasy, we usually imagine this mindless swarm of perfection, a hive mind operating with terrifying, synchronized precision, entirely subjugated to the will of the Dark Lord.
Right, like an anthill of evil, just millions of parts working together flawlessly.
Exactly. But the reality Tolkien presents inside the tower is closer to a masonry arch built without any mortar.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. The only reason the stones hold together is because the sheer, crushing downward weight of Sauron's terror is forcing them against one another.
The pressure from the top.
Exactly. The second you introduce a distraction like a highly valuable piece of loot, the mithril coat, that downward pressure shifts and the entire arch explodes outward because the stones actually hate each other.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize the structural flaw of authoritarian evil in Tolkien's universe.
It's all tension, no bond.
Yeah, and the Princess Toy Nerd analysis draws heavy attention to this philosophical point. Evil can dominate, but it cannot unify.
Never.
Sauron's army is vast, but it lacks any connective tissue. There's no shared ideology, no mutual respect, no genuine loyalty or love binding the orcs together. The hierarchy is maintained solely through violence and the threat of greater violence from the top down.
Which means the system is perpetually on the brink of self-sabotage.
It has to be exhausting.
Oh, it requires constant, exhausting micromanagement from Sauron to keep it functioning at all, because the foundation is fundamentally selfish.
Right.
Sauron assumes everyone operates on his frequency, that everyone desires power above all else. He builds his entire military infrastructure on the assumption that fear of him will override his subordinates' greed.
But fear is an inherently unstable motivator.
Exactly. When the orc captains Shagrat and Gorbag find Frodo, their immediate instinct isn't a unified desire to serve Sauron. It's a paranoid struggle over who gets the credit, who gets the loot, and who might betray the other to their superiors. Their mutual mistrust becomes a self-defeating mechanism.
And Sam, this solitary, entirely unmagical gardener, is the beneficiary of that structural collapse.
He doesn't have to defeat an elite garrison.
No, he just has to navigate the wreckage they create themselves. It proves that a culture built entirely on paranoia and self-interest will inevitably consume itself the moment a stressor is introduced.
It exposes the absolute limits of dark power. Sauron can forge rings of power, he can raise massive fortresses, and he can breed thousands of soldiers. But because he is fundamentally incapable of understanding or instilling trust, his entire empire is a glass cannon.
The glass cannon, yeah.
That blind spot, his absolute inability to comprehend that people might act out of selfless devotion rather than selfish ambition, is the exact crack in the armor that allows Sam to slip through.
Sam exploits that chaos, using the dread-filled pacing to his advantage. Because Tolkien really slows everything down here.
Oh, it's excruciating.
Every shadow Sam hides in, every echo in the stairwell is magnified, building this agonizing tension until he finally achieves his goal. He finds Frodo.
The emotional climax of the chapter, and perhaps one of the most complex reunions in the entire epic.
It is incredibly complex, and honestly, it's subversive.
How so?
Well, when I read a standard fantasy novel or watch an action movie, the rescue sequence is almost always designed to deliver maximum catharsis.
Oh, the big payoff.
Exactly. The hero kicks down the door, unties the captive, they grab their weapons, make a triumphant quip, and fight their way out shoulder to shoulder. The music swells. It's a huge, fist-pumping victory. But the Princess Toy Nerd review specifically categorizes this moment not as a victory, but as a fragile recovery.
A very deliberate distinction.
Yeah, and when I read that they barely survived the rescue, it felt almost anticlimactic. Why rob the reader of that traditional, triumphant catharsis?
Because a triumphant, fist-pumping victory would completely betray the psychological realism that grounds the entire narrative.
We feel it cheap.
Exactly. Providing an easy catharsis would minimize the actual trauma the characters just endured. The significance of framing this as a fragile recovery lies in the brutal physical and mental toll exacted on both of them. They haven't just been roughed up, they have been spiritually hollowed out.
Frodo, in particular, is just broken.
He has been poisoned, captured, stripped of his clothing, and most devastatingly in his mind, stripped of the ring.
He wakes up in a nightmare, entirely defenseless.
Defenseless and consumed by the unnatural, agonizing withdrawal from the ring's influence. And Sam is barely holding on himself. The text forces us to sit with the uncomfortable reality of survival. Surviving extreme trauma doesn't look like an action movie pose. It looks like two exhausted, terrified people weeping in a dark room trying to figure out how to even stand up.
It fundamentally rewires their entire dynamic, too.
It does.
Think about how they started the journey. Frodo was the master, the undisputed ring-bearer, the educated gentleman making the strategic decisions. Sam was the servant, the emotional support system, trailing behind. But in the hours leading up to this rescue, that dynamic was completely shattered.
Because Sam had to step up.
Believing Frodo was dead, Sam took the ring. He made unilateral, decisive leadership choices. He navigated enemy territory, engaged in combat, and most importantly, he felt the psychological venom of the ring working on his own mind.
He crossed the threshold from observer to participant.
Yes?
Sam is no longer just watching Frodo carry the burden. He has felt the chain around his own neck. He has tasted the temptation of absolute power, even if he ultimately rejected it in favor of his devotion. That lived experience replaces his sympathy with profound empathy.
That's a huge difference. Sympathy versus empathy.
Huge. He no longer just feels bad for Frodo.
So.
He truly understands the agonizing weight of what Frodo has been carrying for months.
Which makes the moment Sam returns the ring to Frodo so monumental.
It's incredible.
In the lore of this universe, almost no one willingly gives up the ring once they claim it. It corrupts the mind instantly. But Sam hands it back. It isn't just the mechanical transfer of an object. It is a profound act of trust.
It is a mutual acknowledgement of shared trauma and shared responsibility. Frodo regains his burden, but he also realizes that Sam is no longer just a follower. Sam is a peer.
Right.
Sam has carried the impossible weight and surrendered it freely out of love. Their bond deepens precisely because they have both been broken by the same force. They realize that neither of them can complete this mission alone. The fragility of the recovery is what makes it so resonant. It's not about two warriors high-fiving over a pile of defeated enemies. It's about two deeply traumatized individuals recognizing that their only chance of survival is to lean their broken pieces against one another to stay upright.
Leaning their broken pieces against one another. That is the exact image, and the text makes it agonizingly clear that this deepened empathetic bond is going to be immediately necessary.
Oh, immediately.
Because they don't get a reprieve. The chapter concludes by stripping away all the immediate adrenaline of the rescue and focusing entirely on the terrifying reality of what lies ahead.
The transition out of the Tower of Cirith Ungol is a masterful stroke of pacing that perfectly balances the transition into it.
So they scavenge leftover orc armor to disguise themselves, and they slip out of the tower. And the Princess Toynard review highlights the specific phrasing Tolkien uses to describe their departure. He writes that they get away without further incident.
Such a loaded phrase.
Right. Now, in 99% of storytelling, if the narrator says the heroes escaped without further incident, that is the author's cue for the audience to exhale.
Exactly. It's a checkpoint.
It means the immediate danger has passed. But reading that phrase in the context of this specific review, it doesn't sound like safety at all. It actually sounds incredibly ominous.
It does.
Why does the lack of action, the silence, feel worse than if an entire battalion of orcs were chasing them down the mountain?
It feels worse because it forces a confrontation with the psychological dread of their overarching reality. If there were alarms ringing, if there were orcs actively pursuing them with spears, the characters, and by extension, the reader would be entirely consumed by the immediate physical mechanics of survival.
Right, you're just running.
You don't have time to ponder the existential horror of your situation when you have to decide whether to duck behind a rock or swing a sword. Immediate action demands a reactive mindset. It floods the system with adrenaline, which naturally suppresses broader anxiety.
The action acts as a distraction from the sheer hopelessness of the quest. If you're running for your life, you aren't thinking about how impossible it is to walk across an entire continent of ash to a volcano. You're just thinking about the next 10 feet.
Exactly. By ending the chapter without further incident, by explicitly removing the physical distraction of a chase, the text forces Frodo, Sam, and the reader to look up and actually process where they are.
Which is
Yeah.
not good.
They have successfully snuck out of a terrifying fortress, yes. But they have stepped out into the heart of Mordor. The quiet allows the sheer, crushing scale of the enemy's country to settle over them. They have no food, barely any water. They are disguised in heavy, uncomfortable gear, and they are utterly alone in a land entirely dedicated to their destruction.
It's like sneaking out of the frying pan, taking a deep breath of relief, and then realizing the frying pan is sitting in the center of an active, erupting volcano.
Yes.
The pan wasn't the real problem. The environment itself is the true antagonist.
The silence isn't safety, it's the anticipation of prolonged suffering. The physical infiltration of the tower was acute, stress-intense, but brief. The psychological and physical toll of walking across the plains of Gorgoroth toward Mount Doom will be chronic stress.
This is going to grind them down.
It will be a slow, agonizing deterioration. Ending the chapter on a subdued, quiet note is a brilliant setup for the subsequent chapters, particularly The Land of Shadow. It recalibrates the tension from immediate physical danger to a looming, inescapable psychological dread. It tells the reader, the hard part wasn't getting in. The hard part is what comes next.
The deep breath before the plunge. It really highlights how intentional every single structural choice in this narrative is. If you're listening to this and thinking, well, I just thought the chapter ended because they left the building, you are exactly where Tolkien wants you to be.
He's playing you perfectly.
He is subtly manipulating the pacing to ensure you feel the exact same hollow, exhausted dread that Frodo and Sam feel looking out over the ash plains. And this level of analysis is exactly why fandom deep dives, like the review from Princess Toy Nerd, are so crucial.
They absolutely are. It is very easy to consume a massive epic like this passively. You read about the battles, you enjoy the tension of the rescue, and you move on to the next plot point without interrogating the mechanics of why it made you feel a certain way.
But when creators take the time to dissect the text, to analyze the shift in perspective from macro to micro, or the philosophical implications of the orcs infighting, they elevate the material.
They keep it alive.
They transform it from a straightforward fantasy adventure into a profound exploration of human resilience, the nature of evil, and the mechanics of narrative tension. They keep the text breathing and relevant for modern readers by teaching us how to look closer.
It encourages active engagement, recognizing that a phrase like, without further incident, is actually a deliberate tool to induce psychological dread, requires a level of textual interrogation that these analytical communities foster so well. It reveals the invisible scaffolding holding the story together.
It's the difference between looking at a beautiful clock and actually opening the back to see how the gears interlock to keep time.
I love that.
And we've spent this entire deep dive examining those gears. We started by looking at a radical structural pivot, exploring how Tolkien violently contracted the narrative lens away from sweeping armies to focus on the suffocating isolation of one individual, proving that vulnerability is the true engine of tension.
We examine the redefinition of heroism, too.
Right, where stubbornness, a trait normally considered a rigid flaw, becomes the ultimate survival tool in an environment designed to force surrender.
We analyzed the internal architecture of Sauron's forces, discovering that an empire built entirely on fear and domination is inherently fractured. It operates like a masonry arch without mortar, constantly on the verge of explosive self-sabotage because it lacks the binding power of trust.
And we broke down the fragile reality of surviving trauma. We explored how Frodo and Sam's reunion wasn't a moment of triumphant catharsis, but a delicate, painful acknowledgement of shared suffering, where giving up the ring became the ultimate act of empathy.
A really beautiful moment.
All of this culminates in that terrifying, subdued silence as they step out into the true heart of darkness, entirely unprotected, yet utterly reliant on one another. So the next time you find yourself navigating a scenario that feels entirely hopeless, a situation where the environment is hostile, the odds are overwhelmingly stacked against you, and you feel like you lack the grand expertise, the power, or the magic to fix it, remember the mechanics of this chapter.
Take heart from it.
Remember that you don't need the wisdom of a wizard or the strength of a king to endure. Sometimes the most heroic, dangerous thing you can possibly do to a hostile system is simply refuse to stop moving.
And I think the most profound implication of this entire analysis, the thought that lingers long after the chapter ends, revolves around that fundamental weakness of authoritarian power. If evil's greatest vulnerability is its absolute inability to comprehend trust, making it inherently self-defeating, does that mean the ultimate power to save the world isn't actually found in military strategy, or ancient magic, or sheer force?
Oh, that's a wild thought.
Perhaps the true superweapon is simply the radical, unbreakable act of two ordinary, terrified people choosing to bear one another's burdens in the dark.
You don't always need the structural engineer with the grand blueprints to fix a collapsing world. Sometimes, you just need the gardener who refuses to let the garden die. Keep that in mind the next time you find yourself facing your own long, dark hallway. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Me